JD Vance is absolutely losing it, and the internet is loving every second of it. What was supposed to be a quiet ski trip in Vermont turned into a total disaster when hecklers started chanting Putin's puppet at him.
JD, how does it feel being Putin's puppet?
And let's just say he did not handle it like a pro. Now, social media is tearing him apart, meme by meme, and instead of laughing it off, he's going full meltdown mode. But this isn't his first viral humiliation. From Oval Office disasters to painfully awkward interviews, Vance has a habit of making headlines for all the wrong reasons. So let's break down his latest public embarrassment, because this one is bad. JD Vance gets publicly humiliated. JD Vance probably thought he was in for a peaceful ski trip in Vermont, gliding through the snow and soaking up the crisp mountain air. Maybe he imagined himself as some rugged all-American outdoorsman, a true man of the people. What he didn't expect, however, was to be recognized and absolutely humiliated.
JD, how does it feel being Putin's puppet?
The moment Vance hit the slopes, skiers around him wasted no time letting him know exactly how they felt about his recent actions. A group of people began shouting at him, calling him Putin's puppet, a nickname that has been gaining traction ever since he and Donald Trump disrespected Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office. Other skiers joined in, loudly mocking him and making it clear that his presence was unwelcome. This wasn't some political rally or debate stage where he could spin his words to fit the moment. This was real life, and in real life, people weren't buying his act. He wasn't greeted as a respected senator or even a controversial but commanding figure. No, he was treated like the national embarrassment that he has quickly become, and the best part, there was no escape. One moment, he was a man enjoying the slopes. The next, he was being verbally dragged down them. The chants of Putin's puppet echoed through the resort, reminding him that no matter how much he tries to spin his political stances, the public isn't easily fooled. People gathered with placards asking him to leave their state and go skiing in Russia since he loves playing buddies with Putin.
Ski Russia because JD Vance has no friends in Vermont, but he's got lots of them in Russia, so he should go there for vacation.
The internet, of course, had a field day with this. Memes surfaced almost instantly, showing JD Vance tumbling down the mountain with different captions that made fun of him. Some joked that he looked like he was trying to flee his own conscience, except, much like his political career, he wasn't exactly moving gracefully. It was the kind of public humiliation that politicians dread. Unlike a heated debate where he could argue his case, this was raw, unfiltered ridicule from everyday Americans who saw through his hypocrisy. And the worst part for Vance? This was only the beginning. The phrase Putin's puppet quickly began trending, solidifying Vance's new unwanted title. Beyond the jokes, there was real anger. For many, this wasn't just about a senator getting heckled, it was about holding politicians accountable for their actions. Vance had openly sided with Trump in embarrassing Zelensky, a leader fighting for his country's survival. The fact that he expected to waltz around in public without facing any backlash only made people more furious.
And so what we just witnessed was a meeting in the Oval Office between two cowardly puppets and a hero.
Even some conservatives who might usually defend him seemed hesitant to do so this time. A few right-wing figures tried to frame the incident as leftist harassment, but even their audiences weren't buying it. After all, the outrage wasn't just coming from progressives, it was coming from regular Americans who were disgusted by his behavior. Cable news also picked up on the incident. Pundits debated what this meant for Vance's political future, with some suggesting that he was quickly becoming one of the most disliked figures in Washington. Rep. Seth Moulton, in an interview with CNN, said,
"The President of the United States is a coward who is Vladimir Putin's puppet. And the Vice President of the United States is a coward who is Donald Trump's puppet."
And this all pointed to a claim made by Hillary Clinton in 2016 when she ran against Trump for the US presidency. In a resurfaced video making its rounds on the internet, Clinton accused Trump of having some ties to Russia.
You won't admit that the Russians have engaged in cyber attacks against the United States of America, that you encouraged espionage against our people, that you are willing to spout the Putin line, sign up for his wish list, break up NATO, do whatever he wants to do, and that you continue to get help from him because he has a very clear favorite in this race.
Despite the overwhelming backlash, the Vance supporters did what most blind followers do in these situations. They made him look like the victim. They took to social media, calling the heckling a coordinated smear campaign and claiming that radical leftists were trying to silence him. The problem? No one believed them. Ski resorts aren't exactly known as hotbeds of radical activism. The people calling him Putin's puppet weren't operatives from a political campaign. They were regular skiers who saw him for what he was, was, a hypocrite who had humiliated a wartime leader and then tried to act as none of it mattered, and if he thought this was bad, he had no idea what was coming next. By now, everyone has seen the clips, the headlines, and the sheer embarrassment that was Trump and J.D. Vance's meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. What was supposed to be a diplomatic sit-down turned into an absolute disaster, where Vance and Trump basically treated Zelensky like an ungrateful houseguest instead of a leader fighting for his country's survival. It all went down in the Oval Office just a few days before Vance's ill-fated ski trip. Zelensky had come to the US to discuss military aid for Ukraine, a country that has been fighting off a full-scale Russian invasion for over 2 years now. Seems like a pretty straightforward conversation, right? Not with Trump and Vance in the room. Instead of serious discussions, Zelensky was met with passive-aggressive jabs, outright insults, and a general air of condescension that had everyone watching secondhand cringing. The meeting started tense, but the moment that really set the internet on fire was when Trump told Zelensky,
"You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III."
Imagine sitting across from the man whose country is literally being bombed daily and telling him he's gambling as if he's placing bets on a roulette table instead of defending his nation. And just when you think the situation couldn't get worse, J.D. Vance chimed in, asking Zelensky if he had even said thank you for the aid the US had already given.
Have you said thank you once? This
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire
today.
meeting, have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Yes, that happened. In the middle of a global crisis, J.D. Vance basically turned into a passive-aggressive uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. It was like watching someone remind their cousin that they borrowed $20 2 years ago and never said thanks. Except this wasn't about a loan, it was about life and death. Zelensky, to his credit, stayed calm, but the damage was done. This was supposed to be a diplomatic conversation. Instead, it looked like an interrogation, with Trump and Vance acting like they were being generous for even allowing Zelensky into the room. And it wasn't just awkward, it was humiliating. Let's talk about the sheer level of disrespect in that meeting, because it wasn't just a one-time comment. The entire conversation was dripping with arrogance and condescension. Trump, in typical Trump fashion, seemed more concerned about himself than actual policy. He repeatedly implied that Ukraine should just figure things out with Russia and stop expecting the US to foot the bill. He even hinted at cutting aid entirely, saying,
But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards.
in other words, good luck with that, buddy. Then there was J.D. Vance. Now, if anyone had doubts about how deep his loyalty to Trump runs, this meeting erased them. Instead of showing even a basic level of respect, Vance took a smug, almost sarcastic tone.
You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Because, apparently, when you're J.D. Vance, defending your country from a Russian invasion isn't enough, you also need to send a handwritten thank you card. The entire thing felt like a reality show, except the stakes were terrifyingly real. Zelensky wasn't there to grovel, he was there to negotiate military support for a war-torn country. But Trump and Vance treated him like a nuisance, like a neighbor who keeps borrowing your lawnmower and forgetting to return it.
We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are
Mr.
not
President,
strong-
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
As the meeting wrapped up, it became clear that Trump and Vance weren't interested in diplomacy, they were interested in humiliating Zelensky, and that's exactly what they did. Despite the embarrassment, Zelensky still thanked Trump for hosting him and later released a statement expressing gratitude for US support, even though he had just been treated like an annoying salesman at someone's front door. His tweet read, "Thank you, America. Thank you for your support. Thank you for this visit. Thank you, POTUS, Congress, and the American people. Ukraine needs just and lasting peace, and we are working exactly for that." He even emphasized the importance of continued dialogue, making it clear that, unlike Trump and Vance, he actually knows how to behave like a leader. But the internet wasn't as forgiving. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Trump and Vance's treatment of Zelensky was blasted as a national embarrassment, and it didn't take long for the clips to go viral. Political analysts, foreign policy experts, and even everyday Americans were horrified. Instead of standing by an ally, the US government had mocked and belittled him. Meanwhile, Russia's government was loving every second of it. Russian media praised Trump and Vance. Dmitry Medvedev, a key Putin advisor and former Russian president, wrote on Telegram saying, "A fierce dressing down in the Oval Office. Trump told the cocaine clown the truth to his face for the first time. The Kiev regime is playing with World War III. free, and the ungrateful pig got a solid slap from the pigsty owners. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova also wrote on Telegram saying, "That Trump and Vance refrained from punching this scumbag is a miracle of restraint. When you're getting praise from Putin's inner circle, you know you've done something horribly wrong." Back home, it wasn't just Democrats slamming the meeting, Republicans were uncomfortable too. Some GOP leaders tried to downplay it, but even they couldn't ignore how bad it looked. With Trump and Vance actively undermining Ukraine in front of the whole world, it raised serious questions about how the US planned to handle foreign policy under this administration. And as the outrage grew, so did the personal backlash against JD Vance. He was already unpopular with large sections of the public, but now he was a walking meme. The man had gone from Senate bootlicker to national embarrassment in record time, and all of that humiliation came crashing down on him during his ski trip in Vermont, where the public made sure he felt every bit of the shame he had helped inflict on Zelensky. And this is just the beginning, because JD Vance's hypocrisy and controversial behavior didn't start with this meeting. Oh no, it's been a long, pathetic road to get here. Let's take a look at how JD Vance went from Trump critic to full-blown bootlicker and made himself one of the most ridiculed politicians in the country. JD Vance's hypocrisy and controversial behavior. At this point, JD Vance's political journey has been nothing short of surprising. Once known as a best-selling author with independent views, he has since reshaped his public image into one of Trump's most vocal defenders. His transformation has been one of the most talked-about shifts in recent political memory. This is a guy who once called Trump America's Hitler and then turned around and became his most loyal lapdog. And if that wasn't bad enough, his social media activity has only added to the cringe factor, whether it's reposting an insane tweet about a woman being violated by a dolphin or desperately trying to downplay Taylor Swift's influence on the election. Vance has made a career out of making a fool of himself. To understand just how much JD Vance has humiliated himself, we have to go back to 2016. Back then, Vance was one of the loudest anti-Trump Republicans out there. He called Trump a moral disaster and warned that his presidency would be an absolute nightmare for the country. He even compared Trump to Hitler. Yes, Hitler. And he wasn't just saying this in private, he was saying it in interviews, in essays, on social media. He made it very clear that he thought Trump was dangerous.
I'm definitely not going to vote for Trump because I think that he's projecting very complex problems onto simple villains.
He even went further to say, "I think that Trump's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place," and called himself a never Trump guy.
And so one of the takeaways is not just that the Republican Party base is somehow fundamentally flawed in a way that's unique in American political history, it's that Trump is a really bad candidate and, frankly, I think a really bad person.
So, with this blistering critique he had of Trump, what changed? Simple. JD Vance realized that his political future depended on sucking up to Trump. The moment he decided to run for Senate, he did a complete 180. Suddenly, Trump wasn't a moral disaster anymore. He was the best president in modern history. He deleted old tweets, pretended his past criticisms never happened, and started parroting every single MAGA talking point like a trained parrot. It was pathetic to watch. The same man who once warned about Trump's authoritarianism was now happily endorsing everything he did. He even went as far as calling Trump the rightful winner of the 2020 election, despite zero evidence of widespread fraud. But if there's one thing JD Vance excels at, it's finding new ways to embarrass himself. And nothing proves that better than the time he got caught doom scrolling through dolphin-related depravity. The post in question was a clip of a woman who had been sexually violated by a dolphin, and instead of being horrified, she seemed to enjoy it. Most people would see something like that and immediately hit the back button, not JD Vance. No, he took the time to engage with the content. He retweeted the post and added his own commentary. Maybe the internet was a mistake. Now, at first glance, this just seems like your average weird JD Vance moment. But then people noticed something even stranger. The words woman and dolphin were bolded in the link preview. For those who don't spend too much time online, let's break down what that means. When certain words appear in bold on a link preview, it usually means that those were the search terms used to find the post. In other words, JD Vance had been actively searching for clips about a woman and a dolphin, and that's when the internet lost it. Because let's be real, why on earth was JD Vance looking this up? What kind of deep, dark rabbit hole was he crawling through to end up on this part of the internet? How many clicks does it even take to get from normal political news to this? The memes started rolling in almost immediately. People joked that Vance was secretly intrigued by that kind of content. Others imagined the horrific moment his search history got leaked. Even his own supporters were confused. And JD Vance, he went radio silent. No explanation, no follow-up tweet, no attempt to clarify what he was doing. He just sat there and let the internet drag him for days. And honestly, what could he even say? There was no good excuse for this. He got caught, and everyone saw it. If there was ever a moment that perfectly captured JD Vance's embarrassing political existence, this was it. A man who once wrote a best-selling memoir about the struggles of working-class America had somehow become the senator known for weird dolphin tweets. And the worst part? This is just the beginning. Because JD Vance isn't just embarrassing himself on social media, he's embarrassing himself on the national stage. And as part of the Trump-Vance administration, his failures are only getting bigger. The Trump-Vance administration's embarrassments. And just when JD Vance thought his reputation couldn't sink any lower, reality hit him like a freight train. Because being the guy who got publicly clowned for searching up weird dolphin content is bad, but being part of one of the most disastrous presidential administrations in modern history, that's a whole different level of humiliation. If you thought Trump's first run as president was chaotic, his second term, now with JD Vance by his side, somehow managed to be even worse. From foreign policy disasters to embarrassing domestic failures, the Trump-Vance administration became a case study in political incompetence. Let's start with foreign policy, the one area where Trump and Vance claimed to be tough, but instead made America look like a joke. One of their biggest failures, completely alienating US allies. After publicly humiliating Zelensky in the Oval Office, the administration continued its pattern of treating America's closest partners like garbage. They cut funding to key diplomatic programs, pulled out of critical international agreements, and gave their usual America First tantrum at every global summit. World leaders didn't even pretend to take them seriously anymore. At one G7 meeting, European diplomats were caught looking visibly bored when Vance tried to explain why the US was stepping back from NATO commitments. But it wasn't just allies they embarrassed themselves with. Their handling of foreign conflicts was an absolute train wreck. When Russia escalated its aggression against Ukraine, Trump and Vance basically gave Putin a standing ovation. Instead of standing by US commitments, they pushed for cutting military aid entirely, a move so controversial that even some Republicans distanced themselves from it. And then there was China. Instead of taking any meaningful stance, Trump and Vance's strategy boiled down to a mix of empty threats and bizarre trade policies that hurt American businesses more than China. At one point, Vance gave an interview where he accidentally admitted he didn't fully understand the details of their trade war strategy, a moment so humiliating that even conservative media tried to ignore it. And while they were busy making a mess of US foreign relations, things at home weren't any better. If their foreign policy was a disaster, their domestic policies were somehow worse. For starters, they wrecked the economy. Trump's reckless tax cuts and Vance's disastrous handling of infrastructure spending led to one of the worst deficit increases in modern history. Their economic policies favored corporations while leaving working-class Americans struggling even more, a particularly painful irony considering Vance once branded himself as a champion for the working class. Even their own voters started getting fed up. Rural America, which had overwhelmingly supported Trump in previous elections, saw skyrocketing unemployment and collapsing industries under his second term. Farmers, who had backed Trump in 2016 and 2020, were hit with crippling tariffs that destroyed their exports. And then there were the ridiculous public embarrassments. One of the worst moments, the great Bible blunder of 2025. During a press conference meant to promote Christian values, JD Vance was delivering a speech when he decided to reference his favorite theologian, but instead of citing Augustine, Aquinas, or even C.S. Lewis, he proudly declared his pick, Jules Winfield from Pulp Fiction. Yes, really. For those unfamiliar, Jules is the hitman played by Samuel L. Jackson in Quentin Tarantino's ultra-violent, profanity-laden film. Vance even went so far as to recite Jules's famous monologue, which sounds biblical but is actually a wildly misquoted mashup of Ezekiel 25:17, twisted to justify murder and revenge. The moment was both hilarious and deeply awkward. Imagine promoting Christian values while quoting a fictional assassin who misuses scripture to execute his enemies. Whether Vance was joking or not, the irony was overwhelming. It was a perfect example of trying to sound faithful and instead proving you've spent more time watching Tarantino than reading the Bible. Evangelicals were horrified. The internet had a field day, and late-night hosts never let him live it down. But the real icing on the cake, the way Democrats in Illinois absolutely dragged them both. If there's one place that didn't hold back on calling out the Trump-Vance administration, it was Illinois. Governor J.B. Pritzker called them a national disgrace, saying President Trump's simpering fealty to Vladimir Putin and Russia is embarrassing and dangerous. Illinois stands with Ukraine, and so should the White House. Senator Dick Durbin, the second-ranking Democrat in the Senate, had a lot to say regarding Vance and Trump's attack on Zelensky. We cannot let President Trump rewrite history or upend proven partnerships with decades of bipartisan support. With 46,000 Ukrainians fallen in battle against the real invader, Vladimir Putin, the United States should be thanking President Zelensky for Ukraine's heroic stand on the front lines of democracy against the Russian war criminal. U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth took to X to call them a national disgrace. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Because at the end of the day, J.D. Vance went from a best-selling author with the potential to be a serious political figure to Trump's right-hand man in what many are already calling one of the most controversial administrations in U.S. history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.
I feel bad for J.D. Vance because now he's gonna have to change his name.
That was Trevor Noah absolutely shredding J.D. Vance, and let's just say Vance is not taking it well. In the past few days, the VP has become the butt of the joke, all thanks to Trump's disastrous meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Memes like this and this have flooded the internet, turning Vance into a walking punchline, and now he's completely melting down. In this video, we're breaking down his chaotic reaction, the backlash he's facing, and how he ended up at the center of all this criticism. J.D. Vance gets roasted. In recent days, Vice President J.D. Vance has been getting torched from all sides. His latest misstep, insulting one of America's closest allies. While discussing the proposed European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, Vance dismissed the UK's military contributions, calling them 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. That remark did not go unnoticed. British officials and veterans were quick to fire back, calling his comments deeply disrespectful and historically ignorant, especially given that British forces fought alongside the US in Iraq and Afghanistan, losing hundreds of troops in the process. And that was just the beginning of Vance's very bad week. His tensions with Ukraine's leadership have only made things worse, fueling concerns that he and Trump are abandoning key allies at a critical moment. And just when he thought he could catch a break, the internet had other plans. An old clip from The Daily Show resurfaced, reminding everyone that this isn't Vance's first public humiliation. The clip, originally from May 2022, shows Trevor Noah roasting him over Trump's infamous gaffe, where the former president couldn't even remember his own endorsement, mistakenly calling him J.P. Mandel instead of J.D. Vance.
I feel bad for J.D. Vance because now he's gonna have to change his name to J.D. Mandel.
At the time, it was just a light-hearted joke about Trump's lack of loyalty and memory when it came to his own endorsed candidates. But now, as Vance faces heavy scrutiny, the resurfaced clip is being used as yet another example of how he's been publicly humiliated, both then and now. But that's not all. Even his ski trip in Vermont turned into a PR disaster. While he was out on the slopes, someone in the crowd took the opportunity to call him out, right in real time.
JD, how does it feel being Putin's puppet?
So, how did Vance end up at the center of all this criticism? It all traces back to Trump and Zelensky meeting. In early March, Trump and Zelensky sat down for what was supposed to be a high-stakes negotiation. The US aimed to secure a highly favorable deal with Ukraine, while Zelensky sought to lock in a crucial security guarantee. On paper, it had the potential to be a diplomatic win for both sides. But instead of a moment of mutual victory, the meeting quickly spiraled into a heated confrontation. However, the meeting between the two leaders didn't take a bad turn right away. It was only when Vice President J.D. Vance, with a carefully calculated tone, told President Zelensky that under Trump, the United States was pursuing diplomacy with Russia that the tension in the room rose. Why? Well, on February 12th, Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin, seemingly kickstarting peace talks without involving Ukraine. Naturally, this move didn't sit well in Kyiv or across European capitals. In response, Zelensky and European allies pressed Trump to offer security guarantees for any potential truce, stressing the importance of consequences if either side failed to uphold the agreement. However, Trump remained non-committal and doubled down by saying that Putin respects him enough to not break any deal. That didn't sit right with Zelensky, as he firmly believed Russia could not be trusted to keep its promises. He interrupted Vance, firmly reminding him that diplomacy with Putin was impossible. He recalled how, back in 2019, he, President Macron, and former German Chancellor Merkel had signed a ceasefire with Putin. At the time, everyone assured him that Russia would respect the agreement, but that never happened. Instead, Putin continued his assault on Ukraine, claiming the lives of innocent civilians. Zelensky went on, recalling how Ukraine had released captured Russian prisoners as part of the deal, yet Putin never returned the Ukrainians he had taken. His frustration was evident as he turned back to Vance.
But after that, he broke this ceasefire. He killed our people and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
At that moment, J.D. Vance's tone stiffened. He seemed caught off guard by Zelensky's pushback, perhaps not expecting such a direct challenge to his idea. Growing more defensive, he responded with this.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Zelensky, not backing down, asked Vance if he had even been to Ukraine. Vance replied that he had actually watched and seen the stories, and he knows what happens. He accused Ukraine of bringing people on a propaganda tour. Vance's aggressive approach didn't sit well with many, who felt it soured the entire meeting. As J.D. Vance pressed on with pointed questions, the tension in the room thickened. Zelensky, growing visibly frustrated, warned that the US's reluctance to support Ukraine against Russia wouldn't go unnoticed. It could come back to haunt them. This infuriated Trump.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know that.
bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
What followed was a complete breakdown of the discussion. Tensions escalated as Trump repeatedly emphasized that Zelensky was not in a strong negotiating position. Each time Zelensky attempted to make his case, he was interrupted. Zelensky, maintaining his composure but remaining firm, acknowledged the severity of the situation. He reminded everyone that Ukraine had been standing strong and fighting on its own since the war began. He also clarified that while he had expressed gratitude for US support, he had done so privately in cabinet meetings rather than in public. But the moment Zelensky said Ukraine had been fighting alone, something about that seemed to strike a nerve with Trump. He immediately fired back with a response that was classic Trump.
You haven't been alone.
Cabinet,
you haven't been alone.
We
gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion. We gave you military equipment, and your men are brave, but they had to use our military. If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
Trump took it a step further, making it clear that doing business under these conditions wouldn't be easy. Zelensky attempted to de-escalate, thanking the American people and government, but Trump wasn't letting it go. He kept hammering home the point. Ukraine didn't stand a chance without US support. The tension escalated again when Trump pointed out that Ukraine was running low on soldiers and pushed for a ceasefire, arguing it would be the smartest move to stop the bloodshed and preserve what remained of Ukraine's forces. Zelensky, while agreeing that Ukraine wanted peace, stressed that any ceasefire had to come with solid guarantees to ensure Russia wouldn't just regroup and strike again. But Trump wasn't interested in a drawn-out negotiation. He insisted a ceasefire could happen much faster than a full peace deal, and seemed irritated that Zelensky wasn't immediately on board. Afterward, Trump gave a very clear warning to the Ukrainian president.
But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out.
Trump's stance on this wasn't exactly surprising, given how vocal and consistent he's been about the US role in providing security guarantees to Ukraine. He's repeatedly made it clear that he doesn't see the United States as the primary player in this situation. In fact, he's openly stated, "I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that." That statement sums up his position perfectly. He believes Europe should take the lead in supporting Ukraine, rather than the US stepping in as the main guarantor of security. It's a stance that has sparked plenty of debate, especially considering the high stakes of the conflict and Ukraine's dependence on international support. For Trump, it's about shifting responsibility to Europe, but for others, it raises bigger questions about America's role in global stability. And when it comes to Ukraine joining NATO, Trump has been just as blunt. Asked about it, he responded, "NATO, you can forget about it." I think that's probably the reason the whole thing started. The meeting concluded with Trump effectively asking Zelensky to leave, a moment that sent ripples across the globe. Many European leaders reacted with disappointment, viewing it as a blatant show of disrespect toward a key US ally, especially in front of Russia, the very nation that has devastated Ukraine and claimed countless lives. The fallout from the meeting was swift and brutal, with both J.D. Vance and Trump facing heavy criticism for acting like Putin's puppets. Vance, in particular, tried to project strength, but with memes like this circulating online, it was clear the internet wasn't buying it. Beyond the public backlash, the fallout had real-world consequences. The Trump administration moved to suspend all US military military aid to Ukraine, freezing billions of dollars in critical shipments. This decision effectively cut off deliveries of ammunition, vehicles, and other essential equipment, including supplies that had already been approved under Joe Biden's presidency. And for Ukraine, the cost of this decision could be devastating. The costly blow to Ukraine. One of the biggest reasons J.D. Vance and Trump are facing backlash is the sheer cost of the meeting's fallout, not just for the US, but for Ukraine. The consequences of their decisions could severely weaken Ukraine's position while giving Russia a clear upper hand. As soon as the meeting ended, Russian officials wasted no time capitalizing on the chaos. They seized the moment as a propaganda victory, painting the tense exchange between Zelensky and Trump as a historic turning point. Some even went as far as calling it a livid reprimand from the Oval Office. Russia's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova took it even further, mocking the situation by claiming that Trump had shown restraint by not physically assaulting Zelensky during their shouting match at the White House. I think Zelensky's biggest lie of all his lies was his assertion in the White House that the Kiev regime in 2022 was alone, without support, she wrote on Telegram. She went on to say how Trump and Vance held back from hitting that scumbag is a miracle of restraint. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, now deputy head of Russia's Security Council, joined in, launching a crude attack on Zelensky. He called him an insolent pig who had received a proper slap down in the Oval Office. Meanwhile, Kirill Dmitriev, head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, described the fiery confrontation between Trump and Zelensky as historic. Dmitriev, who was one of Moscow's negotiators in the Russian-American talks in Saudi Arabia back in February 2022, made it clear that Russia saw the spectacle as a turning point. Analysts believe that this meeting has weakened Ukraine's position globally, given Russia an advantage, disrupted Western alliances, and created risky new precedents for world security. A major concern emerging from the meeting is the potential halt of US military aid to Ukraine. For years, American weapons, ranging from Javelin missiles to artillery shells, have been crucial for Ukrainian forces battling a larger, better-equipped Russian military. However, Trump's unwillingness to support Zelensky during their meeting, along with his insistence that Europe should take on more responsibility, has sparked fears that the US could drastically cut or even stop these weapons shipments. Michael Kaufman, a military analyst at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, estimates that Ukraine has enough supplies to sustain its current pace of fighting until the summer, but without US support, Kyiv would quickly run out of ammunition and lose access to some of its most advanced weaponry. And this isn't just about bullets. Ukraine depends on American air defense systems, drones, and intelligence sharing to keep its defenses strong. Since Russia's initial invasion in 2014, the US has provided approximately $69.2 billion in military aid to Ukraine. This figure surged after the full-scale invasion in 2022, with an additional $65.9 billion in support. Through the Emergency Presidential Drawdown Authority, the US has tapped into Pentagon stockpiles 55 times since August 2021, sending Ukraine roughly $27.7 billion worth of military assistance. This aid includes a wide range of weaponry, advanced air defense systems like Patriot batteries, NASAMS, and Hawk systems, along with thousands of Stinger and AIM anti-aircraft missiles. The US has also supplied Ukraine with over 40 HIMARS systems, hundreds of howitzers, millions of artillery rounds, and armored vehicles such as Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles. Additionally, American support has covered anti-armor weapons, small arms, maritime defenses, and cutting-edge surveillance technology, giving Ukraine a critical edge in multiple areas of the battlefield. But all of that may soon change. After the tense meeting, President Zelensky spoke to Fox News, acknowledging that without US support, Ukraine would struggle to resist Russian advances. Despite the uncertainty, he remained hopeful that the strained relationship between Kyiv and Washington could be repaired. He also expressed his wish for Trump to take a stronger stand with Ukraine, though that remains far from certain. Since returning to office, Trump has criticized Zelensky, arguing that he should have made a deal with Putin to avoid the conflict in the first place. One thing is clear: Ukraine needs US support to keep fighting, and losing it would be a devastating blow. From Trump's recent actions, it seems he wants Europe to take more responsibility rather than relying on the US to shoulder the burden. European leaders have pledged to step up their military aid, but the reality is far more complicated. Many European countries are already stretched thin, and scaling up their weapons production to match US levels would take years, time that Ukraine simply doesn't have. After his meeting with Ukraine's president, Trump revealed that his administration had engaged in very serious discussions with Russia about the ongoing war. He hinted that he and Russian President Vladimir Putin might soon take a major step toward ending the prolonged conflict. We We will be speaking, and I think we'll perhaps do something significant. We want to end that war. That war would not have started if I was president, Trump stated. However, critics argue that this is just another empty promise, and they might have a point. Trump has repeatedly claimed on the campaign trail that he could end the Ukraine war quickly, sometimes boasting that he could do it in just 24 hours. But there's one inconvenient fact he tends to overlook. When he was in office, fighting in eastern Ukraine was already escalating between Kyiv's forces and Moscow-backed separatists, long before Putin launched a full-scale invasion in 2022. Ending a war isn't as simple as striking a deal between two leaders. Russia has entrenched strategic goals in Ukraine, and Kyiv has made it clear that it won't surrender its territory. Any negotiation would require significant compromises, and so far, neither side has shown much willingness to back down. If Trump does push for a peace deal, it could mean pressuring Ukraine into accepting terms that favor Russia, something that would spark controversy both within Ukraine and among its Western allies. His relationship with Putin could be a factor, but that might just as easily work against him. If he's perceived as being too friendly with Moscow, it could weaken US influence in Europe and make Ukraine and its allies uneasy. Beyond that, Trump wouldn't have the final say. Congress, military leaders, and international partners all play a role in shaping US policy on Ukraine, meaning any attempt to broker peace would face significant political and diplomatic hurdles, or maybe not, since he just abruptly stopped Ukraine aid. But while Trump appears to be backing off, other world leaders are making it clear they stand with Zelensky. European leaders continue to stand by Ukraine. After Zelensky's tense meeting with Donald Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky found a much friendlier reception in London. On March 1, 2025, he met with British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer at 10 Downing Street, where the two leaders shared a warm embrace. It was a sharp contrast to Trump's treatment of Zelensky just a day earlier. Instead of showing solidarity, Trump had mocked Zelensky's outfit, an odd focus given the gravity of their discussion. Starmer, however, took a different approach, making it clear where Britain stood in supporting Ukraine. Democratic lawmakers wasted no time in slamming what they saw as an appalling meeting between Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, the top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, didn't mince words, calling the spectacle a disgraceful and downright un-American display. She accused Trump of siding with a murderous thug, Putin, over our democratic ally, Ukraine, making it clear where she believed Trump's loyalties lay. Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland was just as blunt, calling the Oval Office meeting beyond disgraceful. He captured the outrage felt by many who saw Trump's treatment of Zelensky not just as disrespectful, but as a serious blow to US-Ukraine relations. His criticism was echoed by Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, who took things a step further, insisting that the people of Ukraine and President Zelensky deserve an apology. Durbin didn't stop there. He directly accused Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance of berating Zelensky and putting on a performance so full of lies and misinformation that it would make Putin blush. Durbin's cutting remarks painted a damning picture of the meeting, suggesting that Trump and Vance's behavior wasn't just embarrassing for the US, it was a betrayal of one of its closest allies. And if there was any doubt about how damaging the incident was, Durbin drove the point home with one final jab. They're popping champagne in the Kremlin. His words underscored the wider consequences of the meeting, making it clear that its fallout extended far beyond Washington. Meanwhile, across the channel, French President Emmanuel Macron stepped in to ease tensions following the Trump-Zelensky clash. He urged both leaders to bring back some level of respect and diplomacy to the conversation. But Macron wasn't just focused on smoothing things over. He also raised a bigger issue, Europe's reliance on the US for defense. He proposed a serious discussion about a European nuclear deterrent, suggesting that France, as the EU's only nuclear power, might need to take on a bigger role in protecting the continent. With shifting alliances and growing uncertainty about America's commitment, Macron seemed to be signaling that Europe should start preparing for a future where it stands more on its own. Joining the wave of support, European Union leaders Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa assured Zelensky that he was never alone. In a joint statement shared on social media, the European Commission and Council presidents encouraged him to be strong, be brave, be fearless, while reaffirming their commitment to working with Ukraine toward a just and lasting peace. Meanwhile, the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, took it a step further by openly questioning the United States leadership. She didn't hold back, stating, "Today, it became clear that the free world needs a new leader. It's up to us, Europeans, to take this challenge." With growing concerns over Trump's friendly stance toward Putin, it's no surprise that European nations are moving swiftly to reinforce their support for Ukraine. This brings up a major question. Why can't NATO nations just come together and fully support Ukraine? Well, here's why. Impact of NATO in the war. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, NATO has played a critical role in shaping the war's trajectory. While Ukraine is not a NATO member, the alliance has provided extensive military aid, intelligence support, and strategic training to help Kyiv resist Russian advances. One of NATO's biggest contributions has been modernizing Ukraine's armed forces, moving them away from outdated Soviet-era tactics and integrating more advanced Western military strategies. This shift has made Ukrainian forces more adaptable, better coordinated, and more effective in battle. Beyond training and modernization, NATO members have supplied Ukraine with billions of dollars in advanced weaponry. The US alone has provided tanks, long-range artillery, and air defense systems, while European countries have contributed Leopard tanks, Iris-T air defense systems, and a steady flow of ammunition. The European Sky Shield Initiative, SI, launched in 2022, has also played a role in strengthening Europe's collective air defense, benefiting Ukraine in the process. These coordinated efforts have been crucial in helping Ukraine resist Russian offensives, reclaim occupied territories, and disrupt Moscow's military operations. However, despite NATO's contributions, the alliance has struggled to act as a fully united front when it comes to Ukraine. Political divisions among member states have created hesitation over sending certain types of advanced weaponry, fearing it could escalate tensions with Russia and potentially draw NATO directly into the conflict. Countries like Germany and France have at times been more cautious about ramping up military aid, while nations closer to Russia, such as Poland and the Baltic states, have been far more aggressive in pushing for stronger support. One major concern is that if NATO as a whole were to intervene in a unified, unrestricted manner, it could actually prolong the war rather than bring it to an end. Russia has repeatedly framed its invasion as a fight against NATO expansion, and a more direct NATO role could reinforce Moscow's narrative, giving the Kremlin justification to escalate further. A fully united NATO effort might also remove incentives for negotiations, as Ukraine would feel more confident in its military strength, while Russia would dig in harder, unwilling to concede under heightened Western pressure. Ultimately, while NATO's involvement has been essential for Ukraine's survival, the alliance remains in a delicate balancing act. Too little support could weaken Ukraine's defense, but too much unity and aggression could turn the war into an even longer and more dangerous conflict. As the war continues, the big question is whether NATO can keep supporting Ukraine without making things worse, or if disagreements within the alliance will change the course of the conflict. One thing's for sure, whatever happens next won't just affect Ukraine, but the future of Europe as well. And that's a wrap. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check out these ones on your screen. You might enjoy them too.